Daniel Lee, born in Leeds on December 2nd, 1932, the son of James, an Irish tailor's cutter, and Catherine, a seamstress from Yorkshire. He described himself as a Yorkshire Irishman and was one of 3 children. His Catholic school experiences were unpleasant, marked by considerable mental and physical abuse. Upon leaving school, he secured an apprenticeship in electrical work, which then promised lifelong employment. Joining and becoming active within a trade union led to difficulties in securing regular work, until he found employment at Swindon Wagon Works. Daniel departed Leeds in July 1950 to find work in London, beginning contracting on sites, building houses or factories as an electrical journeyman where you journeyed from job to job. This was via a contracting firm, Williams Stewart. Every Thursday, a union steward from the Electrical Trades Union, ETU, collected his union subscriptions. He then himself became an elected steward. He attended union courses that outlined his role. Every site was covered by national agreements for wages, and stewards could also negotiate local bonuses if members were required to do some abnormal work. Each steward had to be elected by the men and be constantly accountable. If they were no good, then they needed to step down or be deselected. These were principles Daniel stood by at all times. Daniel saw his steward role as being a bit like a parish priest, as people needed time off and advice to help resolve family problems. He was involved in successful disputes with management over these issues. Daniel would say that his job was shop steward. This would cause personal problems, as by being prepared to speak up to management, this caused him to be victimised or blacklisted. That still happens today. He's left a longer account in his Unite Oral History Project interview. There were strikes over pay and conditions. Firms might look to replace workers by finishing them and hiring others. If a site called for pickets, Daniel and other trade unionists would go along and support the strike. It was in 1957 that Daniel became the elected convener steward for hundreds of stewards, representing many thousands of electricians from all the London sites. His stance meant his own work dried up. He'd go to a site where there was work but not get a start. Married and with 2 children, he was unemployed for 18 months. In May 1959, the Labour Exchange manager informed him about electrician jobs in Swindon, building diesel-electric hydraulic trains at the British Rail Engineering Limited, Brell, workshops. As he'd never worked on trains, he did his background research and got a much-needed job. Even better was that as a nationalised industry, the conditions were a very pleasant surprise, especially compared to building work. Workers could even have some enjoyment out of going to work. Daniel stayed in post until after the mid-80s. The many British Rail workshops that kept the rolling stock going were from Glasgow down to Lancing, Sussex. The major ones were Crewe, Derby, which had 2 workshops, Swindon and York. And then there were smaller ones, which included maintenance depots. 18 months into his contract, Daniel, who on being elected shop steward, had encouraged all skilled workers to combine in either the ETU or Amalgamated Engineering Union, had begun organising the Works Committee that included National Union of Railwaymen members. This made it possible for him to lead the first strike in Swindon over the closed shop that meant no one could get a start unless they joined a recognised trade union. In order to widen their struggle and influence, Daniel encouraged the trade unions to up their involvement in the wider labour movement by participating in Swindon Trades Council and Swindon Labour Party. Throughout all this, Daniel made clear he was not in favour of strikes, saying they're usually called by stupid management. He told everyone that as negotiators, then the union role was to get the best deal possible for the workers. By becoming the chairman of the Works Committee, Daniel found himself off the tools, in a role he fulfilled for 25 years. During which time Swindon went from steam to electric and took the jobs and conditions to a modern situation. He found this wasn't easy, as at senior management level the nationalised industry might bring in retired generals. The Works Committee also worked politically via the Labour Party nationally. including challenging the decisions to close a lot of the railway network under the Beeching Report in 1963. There was a National Railway Joint Negotiating Committee where unions met up to discuss problems in different locations. Daniel was aware that the major problem facing the whole rail industry was that governments wanted to denationalise the business. According to Daniel, there was no other option except to adapt. He had to tell members the truth at mass meetings when there were proposed redundancies. When he started in 1959 at Swindon, there were around 11,000 employees across 2 works, and by 1976 it was around 3,000. As Works Committee chairman, Daniel sought to mitigate the effects of any redundancy announcements through persuading management to offer early retirement and seeking volunteers. The alternative was to jeopardise earnings. Convinced that the membership would not take it, Daniel did not agitate for strike action. Instead, he would challenge vigorously attempts to cut pay and considers that the outcome was generally okay. As Swindon had lots of skilled labour, then he would back seeking outside work that included winning contracts for new shunters in places such as Kenya. The direction of travel, though, remained worrying. In the mid-1970s, Daniel was made aware that British Rail were determined to shut all of the Swindon works. Behind closed doors and without a big fuss, Daniel was able to use his personal relationship to persuade senior manager Alan Dunkley to reconsider. When interviewed over 45 years later, Daniel was proud of what he knew had kept the place open for almost a decade. He had merely pointed out to Dunkley, a hard man in Daniel's view, that the most senior manager in Swindon had constantly said that his workers were the best in the land. Closure would prove to be an embarrassment for all concerned. Daniel believes union representatives must develop a relationship with management, even when they're sitting across from a bloke that they detest for everything they stand for. That the reality is that workers under capitalism are always on the back foot. That even when representing thousands, you still know who has got the real power. If that was not so, then it would mean all the utilities would be publicly owned, as was so in 1945. All of which, argues Daniel, were given away by weak Social Democrats. One of the new pieces of work that Daniel obtained for Swindon was the removal of blue asbestos from train carriages across the train network. An asbestos house was built with all the latest safety measures. It kept up to 200 men on for a considerable period. This brought Daniel, now aged 91, in September 2024, to outlining his own situation, as asbestos was now killing him as he had mesothelioma, and which is even today the biggest killer of workers past and present. The disease takes up to 40 to 50 years to work its way through the body. The employers knew how deadly it was from the 1930s onwards. He recalls that when he was growing up there was a factory in Armley where asbestos was blowing up and down the street, with the kids locally making snowballs from it. He passionately believes that all asbestos should be removed from buildings to prevent future deaths. From 1976 to 1984 in Swindon, Daniel and other union reps had negotiated and mitigated as many job losses as possible. But when it was finally officially announced that it was intended to close Swindon Locomotive Works, then Daniel felt he had done everything he could to keep it open. Faced with demands for demonstrations and strikes amongst mainly groups and people who he felt did not work there, then he felt this was futile and he stepped down from his union roles. When the works closed, most of its historic core became listed buildings, whilst the remaining site was redeveloped. When he left the works in the late 80s, Daniel was active over the following 30-plus years, including during his time in France and in Armagh, where the family of his wife Philomena are from, and where he was an active member of the Unite Retired Members branch. Having always been in a union since 1947, he was awarded his 70-year badge in 2017. As of November 2024, Philomena and Daniel Lee were, because his daughter lives there, Peterborough Care Home residents. When he was asked about why he is a trade unionist, Daniel responded that it was because of what he'd read. It was not necessarily works by the likes of Lenin or Trotsky or Karl Marx, although Daniel has browsed through their voluminous documents. But he's more inspired by people like Jack London, men who needn't have been supporters and put their jobs on the line for trade unionists and trade unionism. Organise, 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 in the mode of the song Joe Hill, you know. I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you and me. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. I never died, says he. I never died, says he. According to Daniel Lee, it's necessary to defend what our forefathers have gained through not only blood and sweat, but an organisation, built through losing their lives in the interest of trade unionism, the labour movement, and most of all, the socialist movement, which is yet to come and which I, Daniel Lee, had an inkling of when I was a youth Labour member in 1945, when the Attlee government was elected. Continuing this theme, Daniel ended by stating, 1945 was the first time that we could really lay claim to have owned some of the public utilities, and so on and so forth. We had recourse to remonstrate in a way that was positive, which we don't have anymore.